Welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. I'm Pat Iyer. This is a podcast that has been sharing content with you, tips, strategies to help you in your business, which I started in September of 2016. We are now in our 9th year, and we love sharing information with you to help you in your practice. Mark your calendars. Our next online conference is taking place February 27, 28, and March 1 of 2025. We have our act together. We've got this conference planned for you and available for you to reserve your seat at the lowest rate by going to lnc.tips/February 2025 virtual. That link again is lnc.tips/February 2025 virtual. There's no spaces in that link at all, particularly between the February and the virtual. lnc.tips/February 2025 virtual. We'd love to have you join us at that conference and get the benefit of the expertise of our speakers and our topics, all designed to give you the knowledge, the support, and the networking that you need as a legal nurse consultant. And now, let's get on to the show. Hi, I'm Pat Iyer, and welcome to Legal Nurse Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is a common problem in all aspects of healthcare and in the environment, and that is falls. They can result in tremendous injuries. They can occur because of liability. And we're often asked as legal nurse consultants to help an attorney pull apart a case involving a fall. I have with me today Laura Chung, who has 24 years of experience as a bedside nurse. She currently works in a critical care unit and gets to take care of the patients, some of whom have fallen and have suffered severe injuries. She's currently also a member of the rapid response team in her hospital and a relief charge nurse. She works as an independent legal nurse consultant and started her business in the year 2020. Now, wasn't that a memorable year for us, Laura?
Oh,
And
yes.
I remember talking with you at that time about what it was like to work in an ICU filled with COVID patients.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Pat. I remember that conversation too. And I look back, it was during the height of COVID, but before vaccines came out. So,
Oh, yeah. When people were caught up in a black hole and didn't survive. If we think about falls, I mentioned we often think about falls occurring in healthcare. They can happen in acute care, long-term care, same-day surgeries, homes. There's all kinds of places. But what about some other places where falls could occur? Could you share with us how we can expand our concept of helping an attorney with a fall case beyond being inside of a building?
sure. Yeah, I think a lot of times we think of falls in the healthcare setting, in nursing homes, in the hospital, but there's actually a whole other category of falls. And these are worksite or industrial falls. These occur at the work site. And falls can happen indoors at a work site or outdoors. So I've heard of some falls happening inside. The most common would be slip and falls, where maybe the floor is wet, maybe a worker falls due to buckled carpet, uneven floors, that sort of thing. And then outdoors, at work sites, falls can be really severe. So a worker might be walking and step on a tarp or fall into a hole. And these type of falls can cause much more severe injuries, head injuries, spinal injuries. So outdoor work sites probably have the most fall hazard risks.
Mm-hmm. I worked on a case involving a man who did indeed step on a tarp that covered a hole in a roof and he thought the floor was solid, and he went from the roof down to the first floor, which was 2 stories, and had head injury, broke his arms and his legs, his pelvis, lots of fractures, and did not return to his previous state of mental competency because of the head injury.
Right. And I've seen a lot of unfortunate falls come into ICU too, um, where a worker is up in a tree doing tree work and falls out of the tree and becomes paralyzed. So a lot of really sad, unfortunate cases. And then I've seen what you think would be a simple injury. I've seen a worker slip inside the bathroom on a buckled floor, uneven floor, and had a traumatic brain injury from that. So you never know how severe these falls are going to be.
Mm-hmm. If you could give us a little overview, I don't think everyone will be familiar with the workers' compensation system in our country, and who pays for care when a worker is injured on the site. Could you explain that part?
Right. It's a very complicated system. Um, so usually if the worker is covered by the insurance there at the workplace, they will pay for them to be seen. It's a difficult system, and a lot of times doctors will request tests such as MRIs, even simple medications, Flexeril, Neurontin, maybe a few more sessions of physical therapy, and these are often denied. The process is very long and drawn out, so that even if the company that the worker works for is paying for these treatments, a lot of times they're delayed, and the worker might even have to pay out of pocket. And then we have some unfortunate cases too, where maybe the person that fell out of a tree was doing tree work. Maybe they were here undocumented. They weren't in the system. And then they really have trouble accessing care also. They don't have insurance. So it's a very complex system. It's not easy to navigate. And a lot of the records that I see, the workers become very frustrated because care keeps being denied.
Mm-hmm. Who is involved in terms of healthcare workers interacting with the injured worker?
Sure. So probably the first person to help the injured worker would be a site supervisor. Now, they might have basic first aid, but they're probably not highly trained in medical issues. So hopefully a first responder would be called. Hopefully, the site supervisor is facilitating calling 911 if it's a serious injury. And then the worker would be stabilized, taken to the nearest emergency department. However, that doesn't always happen. A lot of cases that I've worked on, the site supervisor encourages the worker to go to the clinic first, the workers' compensation clinic. And these clinics vary in what type of patients they can take care of. So some of them may not have imaging capability. They might not have x-rays there. Some do, it depends. So say the worker needed a shoulder x-ray, they might go first to one clinic that can't do it, then they might be shuffled to another clinic. I've even seen patients or workers that have hit their heads and been told to go to the clinic first, when obviously they should have gone to the emergency department first. Um, I've seen a poor worker got shuffled around. So they went to the first clinic, which didn't have x-ray capability. They went to the second clinic, which did have x-ray capability. And from there, they were sent to the emergency department when it probably should have been the other way around. Emergency department, and then follow up at the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously once the patient gets to the emergency department, the nurses and doctors take over, and then they're usually told to follow up at a workers' compensation clinic. Some really big hospital systems have their own clinics. And then other times they are outsourced.
Lots of steps along the way. And I'm thinking about a case I worked on. It was not a fall, but a man who got trapped inside of a dumpster. He was compressed against a chute. Actually, he fell into the chute. It was a fall, but the chute was so narrow that he had an anoxic brain injury because he was suffocated by this. And he was alone when he fell into the chute. Another factor to add to this is how soon are you discovered? He was able to get his phone and call his brother and say, get help from me. I'm trapped. And then the other workers came, they got EMS. They did CPR with one of those automatic devices whose name has just gone out of my head, but it does.
Lucas device.
Lucas, thank you. The attorney was fascinated by that, by the way. Really? You mean you don't have to kneel over the stretcher? And he ended up with permanent anoxic brain injury. The case has since settled. There were all kinds of shortcuts that were taken on the work site, errors by his employer that resulted in him working alone and being in a hazardous situation. So that leads me to, when you think about liability, we're looking at potentially two parts of this: the worker's employer, and then what happens within the healthcare system. Can you go into that a little bit for us? Before we continue.
My name is Deneen Bradford. I work for the Illinois Department of Public Health. I am a nurse surveyor. I currently inspect homes for individuals with intellectual disabilities to ensure that the facilities are delivering health care, to ensure the health and safety needs are met of the residents that reside in the facilities. I also have experience with inspecting homes, skilled nursing homes for residents. I did the same thing for those homes, and we ensure that the facilities provide care to the residents in the skilled nursing homes and the residents in the homes for individuals with intellectual disabilities, according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid federal regulations. Before I started coming to the LNC Success Connection conferences, I went through another program to become a legal nurse consultant. When I initially went to that program, I thought that I would have the supports that I need when I came from that program to run my legal nurse consultant business. As time went on, I found out that I did not have those resources that I needed. I found out about the LNC Success conferences. I started coming, my first conference was in October of 2020. Now I have been to 8 of those 9 conferences. The fact that it has been a virtual conference after the COVID-19 pandemic has been amazing. I did not have to incur any costs for trying to travel to go to an in-person conference. The conferences have offered a lot of valuable education and resources to me to help me manage my business and grow my business. There have been presentations about marketing my business, report writing. And as a nurse, I can write reports in the medical and nursing field with my eyes closed, but when in the legal world, the reports are written differently. That was a new skill that I needed to acquire. The presentations have also been about how to develop a resume, a curriculum vitae, how to communicate with attorneys to meet their needs and ultimately obtain them as an attorney client. That was a big thing for me because when you talk to other healthcare professionals, it's different than talking to professionals in the legal world. Also, how to work behind the scenes as a legal nurse consultant. There have been presentations about the experience of being an expert witness, also exhibiting at attorney conferences, and then how to review electronic medical records. There are a lot of nuances that I didn't know that you have to engage in to review electronic medical records. Since I've been going to the conferences, it has really felt amazing. It has built up my confidence to work as a legal nurse consultant in the legal world, since it's different than the world of healthcare. The conferences have allowed me the opportunity to network and connect with attorneys and legal nurse consultants from all over the country. So if you have an opportunity to attend one of these conferences, you won't regret it. It's a chance of a lifetime. You should definitely take that opportunity. If you're interested in starting a legal nurse consultant business, growing your business, this is an opportunity that you should definitely take advantage of, and you will have support system as long as you run your business.
Again, a lot of times a site supervisor will encourage a worker to go to the clinic first. And there's a few reasons for this. So the site supervisor might be under pressure to keep a no injury record going. You've seen those signs, 300 days without injury. And so if that record gets ruined, the site supervisor might be under a lot of pressure for that. Also, they might want to operate a factory or whatever type of site it is with no lost time incidents. That means that the site supervisor is responsible for keeping the factory up and running without any breaks, without, stopping the whole process. So that might cause them to encourage the worker to go to the clinic instead of the emergency department. Also, if the worker does go to the emergency department, it's usually a recordable incident to OSHA. So then the company could face violations if there are safety violations. It's basically a mark on their record. And then OSHA might start investigating and, kind of bringing attention to the company if they have unsafe practices. So OSHA does have the power to inspect the work site to make sure that it's safe. They have the power to fine companies if they find unsafe conditions or willful violations. And then they have the power to completely shut down the work site as well. It's rare that this happens, but it is a possibility. I was looking up some information earlier, and I found a case in 2010 in Delaware where OSHA was investigating a poultry processing factory. And they found so many willful violations, so many flagrant violations. There weren't guards on the machinery. The workers didn't have adequate PPE. There wasn't adequate ventilation, and they use a lot of ammonia there. So it was causing a lot of respiratory issues for the workers. So they actually shut down operations, and they fined them over $800,000. But of course, the big thing would be the loss of the factory operating. So that's what the company would be most upset about, because they're, losing money minute by minute. So I think those are some of the reasons why site supervisors kind of encourage workers to be seen at the clinic first, even when they should probably go directly to the emergency department.
And for our listener who is not familiar with OSHA, could you explain that?
So they are the Occupational Safety Health Administration, and they basically make sure that work sites are safe for workers in the United States. And of course, we've all heard about, in other countries, the working conditions aren't as good because maybe they don't have a federal agency like that. We've heard of, factories overseas where children are working or where people are getting injured all the time and not getting paid properly. So it is fortunate that we do have this overseeing federal agency to make sure that workers are safe. And I remember quite a few things during COVID where OSHA would be involved because workers were working right next to each other. I remember in a lot of meat and poultry processing factories, they had to make sure that workers were wearing masks and had proper PPE because COVID could just spread like wildfire in those instances. So they were really at the forefront of the pandemic as well. But they do oversee any type of factory company where workers could possibly get hurt. And they have standards such as the company must provide PPE, personal protective equipment to each worker, things like that. Standard things that, sometimes we take for granted in this country, but are really there to protect the worker.
Mm-hmm. I know you've mentioned you've worked on some of these kinds of cases. What types of records do you typically get?
Oh boy, the records can be quite extensive. And a lot of these cases drag on for years, a lot of times due to the insurance companies. So say if a patient or worker it's decided that they need surgery, sometimes the insurance company will not allow that. And then the doctors will have to keep advocating that this is what the patient really needs. And it can go on for years, unfortunately. So a lot of times with the records, I get the first responder records. I look for the site report that would come from the company where the worker was injured. And then we get into the medical records, but then we also have the state reports. So usually these type of injuries are filed through the specific state. And I know in California, there's a very specific look to it. It's called the Doctor's First Report of Occupational Injury, and it has to be filled out by a provider. But then these providers, these poor providers are also documenting their own medical records and writing notes. So there's a lot of duplicates. And I discovered this when I was first doing these type of cases. I was like, I feel like I've just read the same exact thing. Well, it is. You're going to get basically 2 sets of each office visit, 2 sets of records. So it's a lot to kind of go through, sift through everything. Oh my gosh, I remember one case that I was working on, it probably went over the course of 5 years or so, and I was doing a chronology. And I thought I was done. And then I opened a file that contained, I don't know, 14 more folders. I don't even know how many pages that was. Oh, I just wanted to cry when I opened it, but I got it done. But the records are very extensive. And then as I'm going through the records, I always am just blown away by the advocacy that these doctors and providers show to these workers. They really go up to bat for them, trying to get more physical therapy for them. And it's really a maze to navigate. So
Mm-hmm. Sure. It sure sounds like it. I know with so much at stake here in terms of the costs of caring for somebody who's been injured on the work site, there would be a natural tendency to want to point the finger at that individual as being somehow involved in what happened to them. What are some of the implications of that? How could a worker end up being part of the chain of events that led to injury? And then how does that factor into what you do as the LNC?
I've seen some cases where workers probably don't do all the things they should. So, for example, a worker might not be wearing a hard hat where they should be wearing a hard hat, where it's required. So that can make things difficult. They might not be wearing the proper foot attire. So say every person on the work site is supposed to be wearing steel toe boots. They might not have been wearing them. They might have been wearing sneakers, unfortunately, and then they had a foot injury that, well, maybe it could have been prevented. We'll never know. So things like that, we really have to do our best to advocate for the workers, even though maybe they didn't do all the things they were supposed to. And then throughout the injury process, workers will often be drug tested. So sometimes that can be a difficult situation if, they were taking a substance they weren't supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they weren't drinking on the job site, but you never know. And then afterwards, sometimes workers do things that don't make them the best patients. So sometimes they'll skip physical therapy or no show to appointments, things like that. And I try to look at the case from all different perspectives. Maybe they were having transportation issues, getting to physical therapy. Maybe it was just one missed appointment. Everyone, can miss one appointment. But if it's multiple appointments, that's something that, we have to maybe talk to them and say, hey, it's really important. We need you to comply with your physical therapy. We need you to show up for your appointments and be compliant with your treatment plan, because then it shows everyone that you're committed to getting back to your pre-injury state. So things like that, it's important to look at. I will give my attorney clients a heads up. I might say, so-and-so missed 5 physical therapy treatments. I just want to let you know, just so that they know ahead of time and they can, have that information up front.
Yes, because you certainly know that if this goes into a litigation situation, that the defense attorney is looking at those and tracking those missed appointments too.
Mm-hmm.
With the world that we live in now, with the increased prevalence of cameras, have you had an opportunity ever to look at camera footage of an incident?
I actually haven't encountered any camera footage. I've encountered pictures that the workers have taken themselves, which is a great idea. For example, there was a case I was working on where the worker had reported that the bathroom floor was uneven, it was dangerous, someone was going to trip. And then unfortunately, that worker did trip on the floor and had a head injury. And he was thoughtful enough to take a picture of the bathroom floor, which he had reported a few times. So it's always good to get a picture of the scene if you can. If there's any pictures that are available, of course, video footage would be even better. But I don't think it's very routine.
I am thinking about some footage that I saw on the internet one time. And it was a man who claimed that he slipped on a wet floor at work. And there was a camera up at the ceiling that showed him taking water out of the ice machine and spreading it on the floor, and then laying down on that wet spot and starting to shout for help.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to assume that cameras are probably everywhere nowadays.
Yes, I've also heard in casinos, they have put cameras everywhere because of so many people wanting to sue the casino, because after all, they have so much money. That's where the money is. So they come up with these fraudulent stories about trips in the hallways of the casinos, but don't go anywhere once the camera footage is evaluated and they find that this person's claims are dishonest. I know we could talk a lot more about this topic, Laura, but we've run out of time, and I know that our listener is going to be interested in knowing how they can connect with you.
So I'm on LinkedIn under Laura Bouchard Chung, and then my email is laura@bclegalnurse.com. And then I'm on Instagram. I try to post there pretty frequently. And my Instagram handle is Laura Legal Nurse.
Okay. And that wasn't taken by anybody else. Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you to you who's been watching this program on our Legal Nurse Business YouTube channel or listening on the audio channels. Hang on a few more minutes and find out who's coming up next. I'll see you then. Hey, I'm Pat Iyer, and coming up next, you'll have an opportunity to hear from a trial attorney with more than 38 years of experience who has settled cases valued at more than $150 million. John Meny is my guest, a New Jersey-based plaintiff personal injury attorney. We just finished a podcast, and I would love, John, if you could describe for our listener what we covered in your podcast.
Sure, Pat. And it was my pleasure to participate in your podcast. For your listeners out there, legal nurse consultants, we covered a number of different topics. One dealt with using legal nurse consultants to get into evidence medical bills which are not covered by no-fault insurance in car crashes and those other cases which are not car crash cases, how we can use a legal nurse consultant to summarize the usual and customary medical bills. We also went over the difference between a life care plan and a future medical plan and how we use legal nurse consultants for that. The importance of a legal nurse consultant, keeping it real simple, because ultimately keeping in mind that you're going to present this case to a jury, and so that it has the reports have that wow factor where the injuries jump out off the page by using demonstrative evidence, summarizing the care and treatment, and most importantly, the pain and suffering and the damages that the person went into. So there are a number of different things that we use the legal nurse consultants for. We discussed all that, and I think your listeners can hopefully gain some knowledge in terms of what we as lawyers look for when we hire legal nurse consultants.
Thank you, John. Be sure to catch John Minnie's podcast coming up next on Legal Nurse Podcast. Thank you for being part of our audience of Legal Nurse Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this session and you got some great tips from it. I would love to see you at our February 2025 LNC Success Online Conference. That will be our 11th conference, taking place February 27, 28, and March 1. You can get your ticket by going to lnc.tips/February 2025 virtual. I'd love to see you there.